Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to you wherever you are tuning in from today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on our webinar, CMO Confidential, a candid perspective to scaling biomanufacturing. I'm here with Deborah Davies. My name is Cat. I'm a business development manager here at Synonym. So just to give you a little bit of background on Synonym, we are enabling bioproduction by using our proprietary database of more than 300 contract manufacturing facilities that focus on fermentation worldwide, as well as our bioprocess expertise to help companies produce at the right manufacturers. We believe that the future is bio, and that can't be done without partnering with manufacturers who create bioproducts. So I'm here with Deborah Davies. She is the Business Development Director for Olon Biotech, where she focuses on driving new business opportunities in microbial fermentation for the pharma, the food, and the synthetic biology sectors. Deborah is probably one of a handful of people who has been in the industry for more than 20 years. And it's an absolute privilege to be speaking with you today, Deborah. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. Deborah, can you tell us a little bit about Olon? What does Olon do? Where are you located? And what makes Olon such a unique and well-positioned fermentation contract manufacturer?
Well, first of all, Kat, thank you so much for asking me to join this webinar and for everyone there who is joining. So let me first start off by giving an introduction to Olon. So Olon is probably best known as being an active pharmaceutical ingredient, API manufacturer, which it does using chemistry and fermentation technologies. Olon Biotech is the CDMO division using microbial fermentation. So Olon, we are a family-owned Italian company. The head office is in Milan, and we have 14 manufacturing sites and 9 R&D sites worldwide. So the Olon Biotech division consists of Olon France, which conducts development activities, and we have 2 industrial manufacturing sites in Italy, one in the north, one in the south, where they offer scale-up, optimization to commercial manufacturing. So we have a global client base, and as you've mentioned, we cover food, pharma, ag bio, cosmetics, flavor and fragrances, technical grade, whole range of different markets. And our clients come in all shapes and sizes, from startups to big pharma. So sometimes larger clients where they've got in-house fermentation capabilities, they will transfer a cash cow product whilst they use their capacity to nurture new clients, new projects coming on, or the other way around, that they will keep their cash cows but want Olon to develop and scale up their new projects and maybe then transfer them back in-house after a few years once they're commercially successful. And then we also have startups which are always new and start at small scale for scaling. I suppose the area of why do our clients choose Olon? Well, I think firstly because we have decades of experience as an outward-facing CMO. Our capacity, we have 4,500,000 litres of fermentation capacity. And the commercial scale fermenters that we use for non-pharma projects are 35,000 litres, 60,000 litres, 120,000 litres, and 255,000 litres. And we have multiple fermenters at each of those sizes, which means that we can juggle the fermenters that we use to keep the DSP fully occupied, which gives a cost-effective benefit. We work with a wide range of microorganisms, bacteria, yeasts, including Pichia with methanol, and filamentous fungi, and we have over 12 DSP suites with different equipment setups. So all of this together, I think, gives us a very flexible approach to managing different types of projects. But the key point, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. The key point that I want to make about scaling up is that it is not easy, and I'm putting that in capital letters. I think I'm tired of attending conferences where the impression is given that everything is rosy, nothing ever goes wrong. And I ask some people afterwards why they give that impression, and they say it's simple. In the audience are our potential clients, our investors, and our board. And they can't afford to deviate from this simplistic approach. But I look at it that if it's taken you 5 years to scale your process up to 100 liters, please don't assume it's going to take 5 minutes to get up to 100,000 liters. And I think project drivers change as you scale. So initially, when you start a project, what you're looking to do is to get milligrams in order for application testing. So really, it doesn't matter what your media is. You can feed your microorganisms on the equivalent of caviar and champagne. You can have a convoluted DSP as long as you get those milligrams to test that in the application, it's job done. But after that, you need to start looking at how to wean your microorganisms and feed them on gruel. Simple is better. DSP, simple is better. And I just want to, for those, because I like talking to a lot of investors and also, non-fermentation people about the issues in scaling. And the best scenario that I have for this is, if you just think about what is your favorite meal that you maybe just cook for 2 people, how would you view that if you then were scaling this to 20 people, then to 200 people, and then to 2,000 people? So how you approach that would be different. And if I just use rice as an example, so you've got your saucepan, which is really all that a fermenter is, but if you've got your saucepan, you've got your boiling water, you add your rice to it, the grains will dance and bubble until the rice is cooked, and then you drained it. Great. If you're now going to be cooking for 20 people, most people wouldn't have a saucepan that's 10 times larger. So you're then compromising. So you've got less water per grain. So the impact of that is less bubbling. It's more likely to sink to the bottom. You've also got starch being produced, which is going to add to the viscosity. And so what you now need to do is, in order to stop your rice catching on the bottom, you need to stir. So basically with this, the next stage is that you've either got to stop doing your next activities because you need to stir your rice, or you need to get somebody else in to stir your rice. So basically, every time you scale up, what is the impact on time and cost? And one of the ways then to sort of help manage this scale up is, I always suggest, have a devil's advocate in your team, so that when you come and review data in the project team, there's always somebody, and you can change who is the devil's advocate, who comes back and just says, great, but how do we actually, what would this step look like at 100 litres, at 1,000 litres, at 100,000 litres? So that you start thinking about, if you've got a temperature change, a pH pH change, you need to siphon something from vessel A into vessel B, how would that be handled? And what are the plus and minuses of tolerance for each of those steps? So I hope that gives an introduction and gets some ideas flowing for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. I think that's one of the best, or I would say the best metaphor that I've ever heard for scaling up. Sure, I can cook some grilled cheese at home on my cast iron, but I definitely do not have 20 cast irons to make 20 grilled cheeses for guests.
So the next webinar is going to be just on my favorite foods, I think cooking.
That sounds perfect. So Deborah, thank you so much for being really honest there, and for sharing also the advice about the devil's advocate. I think that working in small teams at startups, you have a small team. There's not a lot of people there, and I think dedicating a devil's advocate for every conversation is really critical and could help make key decisions much more powerful, especially earlier on, either in a project or in a startup as a whole. So I just want to reiterate for everyone that's participating today, 4,500,000 liters at Olon. And so I see Olon as, one of the most established and respected fermentation CMOs in the world. And I'm sure that, Deborah, you're getting many requests on the daily. So what information do you need to know about the client's wants and needs to properly evaluate taking on their programs?
So if I come across a client then, or we find each other and there is a project to scale up. So the first thing I like to do, even before we get an NDA in place, is to have a scoping call. So part of then that is to check that there is fit. So what is the scale that the client is currently at? And this is both at fermentation and DSP. What is the basic equipment that is needed? And are there any complexities that we should need to know about at the start? For example, is there solvents? Do we need ATEX line for DSP? And then also, what are the commercial volumes? What's the roadmap for this in year 1 and in year 5? So we know that this is a best guess, but it just helps us in our selection of which is the best site and which is the best line. And then in agreement with the client, we decide if this is the right time to enter into an NDA. And then once we have that, it's then digging further into the details. So understanding what is the process detail here? What is the titer? What is the yield? What are the commercial cost targets that you are looking to achieve? So this is at industrial scale, but what is your cost target? Because that's a real stop-go. Are there any regulatory requirements or particular specifications that you need to meet? And I think this is important. Has the ingredient been tested in the final application? Does it actually do what it's meant to do? And then for us, it's important, how will the project be financed? Are you looking to get investors online, or is this going to be covered within house?
So Deborah, let's say they make it through all those steps. You get an NDA in place, you continue scoping, getting the details, and everything is a go from your side and the client's side. It looks like it's going to be a good partnership and good relationship between both teams. How would you allocate capacity for a new program? Meaning, what factors would you use to schedule this project in at your facilities? And what's a typical timeline that you see happening for different projects to to work at Olon?
Okay, that's a really interesting, actually complex question. So I've already alluded to that Olon, we have different manufacturing setups, we have different projects, different requirements. So I always think with our manufacturing team, they are very, very good at juggling schedules. So tick point to that. But I think it's always that the starting point is what is the DSP and which line in our facility do we see that this project is a good fit for. Then we look at the project itself and what the scale up targets are. So we then look at what is the occupancy on the line that that project needs. And also, what are the expectations in terms of manufacturing? So then we look at what is the capacity that we have available, and does this actually fit the client's requirements and timelines? So if that's the case, still think that there is a good fit here, we will write a proposal which will also give an estimated timeline, and also the timeline at commercial, at least for year one, if that's if we've received the details for that. Then as we actually run through that proposal, we update the timeline. So if it's decided, let's to further lab trials, further pilots, further demos that extend things, then the whole of the project plan gets amended. So it's like a living document, so that we always are aware of what the implications are on site availability at industrial scale. It's always the aspect, if I can say, of both parties are looking to balance time, risk, and cost. And as I'm always saying, those are three very unhappy bedfellows. So a client will have at any one time, they will be pushed to move as quickly as possible, probably by the board or by their clients. However, if you do something before you're ready, you need to assess what is the risk and what are the cost implications. So the client needs to manage that, and Olon needs to manage that. So I see my job really as being quite simple. My job is to keep the fermenters full. That's it in a nutshell. So when we have projects, though, when clients can commit to actually wanting capacity at the industrial scale, that is where great discussion and cooperation needs to be used. So we know what expectations are. And expectations will change. They will change because the process changes, and they will change because the client has it changes. They're going to delay the launch of their product, which has a knock-on end that you now don't need to deliver the first metric ton by this date, and it's shifted. Could be shifted back, could be shifted forward. So we will always do our best to accommodate. But when it comes down to it, a purchase order is what secures the weeks in the production schedule with the name of that client. So we're always balancing between what firm commitments we have and what intended commitments are there, and balancing the two, as is the client. So therefore, it has to be a very cooperative discussion.
Mhm. Thank you, Deborah. I'm sure that there's lots of Gantt charts and living calendars going on with every single project. So thinking about the future as well. So, we're talking about time, cost, quantity being very important. And one thing that's talked about a lot, and of course in this industry, is sustainability. And as we get closer to 2030, many companies have different sustainability goals, a number of net zero by 2030 goals. Here at Synonym, we're seeing requests come through looking for facilities that can handle waste materials as a feedstock. And so I was wondering, is this something that you're also seeing? And if so, what really needs to be considered when working with a manufacturing partner and using upgraded raw materials?
So Olon as well is we have our own sustainability manifesto, and if anybody comes to see our site who hasn't seen it for a few years, will see that we have got a lot of solar panels as part of our commitment to that. And so as part of that, yes, looking at using waste materials and also opportunities to use our waste materials that we produce is definitely something that we look at. However, I in one way, I think if you consider a waste material as actually being just any other raw material, that is the starting place. So a waste material, we would just consider that with supply chain, looking at, what is the specification, what is the packaging format, can we purchase this in the volumes needed for the fermenter sizes we have, because these are not small, and can we get hold of this 12 months of the year, or can we store it for the adequate time to manage the client's forecast? So I think that with our scale has a level of complexity, because I think that a lot of the waste materials have too great a variation, because if they have a variation, then it would have a knock-on impact to what we do. And I think the last thing that a client of ours would want is that we say, oh, well, we were expecting 1 ton. Unfortunately, we've only got 750 kilos because the quality of this waste material was different to the previous time, and it's had this impact. So I think we don't want to add more complexities. We want to simplify things. But as long as that raw material can be sufficiently standardized, that's not a problem. And if you think about it, whey protein used to be a waste material from cheese manufacturing. Now whey protein is a product in its own right, used for many different applications. So the same thing, how we're viewing waste materials now from another industry, it won't be long before we just consider it another raw material to be purchased. But I think quite often there would need to be some intermediary standardization. And I think that's probably the bit that is missing, particularly at the scale of where we are.
That makes sense. Yeah. In a previous role, I worked with food waste in Canada, and that was absolutely our biggest issue, because in the summer, the inputs were things like watermelons and apples and fruit. And in the winter, we were seeing mostly meat and things like that. So when that gets broken down and turned into a raw material for fermentation, you're seeing, a lot more nitrogen or a lot more of other nutrients that the bugs are going to have a field day with and make up their own things with. So thank you very much for that insight there, Deborah. I often speak with people who, they're looking to either get to a larger scale, or they're looking to work with another manufacturer. And often their objective or their target in terms of getting a proposal is they're looking for dollars per kilogram as the quoted price. for the production of their product. And when you're thinking about looking at things in dollars per kilogram and dollars per ton, that's a different kind of project or production campaign than when you're thinking about things from a one-time campaign perspective or a price per campaign. So I really was curious about your thoughts on when it makes sense to think about things from a batch perspective or batch campaign perspective versus the long-term price per product quantity perspective.
Okay. So first of all, I hope that sort of come through, understanding what the target cost for your product is, to me, is one of the critical questions. And I would say it's never too early to start thinking about where are we aiming for with our project. Even if it once it's just a gloop in a test tube, you can still start thinking about where is this going to go and what do we need to achieve. So I love it when people talk to me about the cost, their cost target, because to me this actually means that they understand their client and what their client wants in terms of the specification, in the format. Is it a liquid? Is it a powder? What kind of pack size that they want, and any other supply chain needs, because all of this will have an impact on the cost per kilo. So as I said before, I like to have a, as soon as we've got the NDA, is to have a realistic discussion, particularly if you're looking to replace an existing ingredient in the market. The data is out there in terms of what is that cost per kilo that you need in order to have it a swap out. I honestly don't think that in any markets there is a green levy that you can put on your product just because it's been produced more ethically. I think you need to aim to match or undercut the alternatives that are already there. So I use this as a stop-go for a project because we have a manufacturing site in Europe. Italy is never going to have the cheapest utilities in the world, so best to get this stop-go right at the start. Then during a project, whilst we're scaling up, so a typical proposal for us would cover tech transfer, which is we nitpick tech transfer, lab pilot, first run at commercial scale, the demonstration batch, and then 3-batch consistency. So during this, we are learning about the process. So there we have a cost for a batch. Then at the end of that consistency, it will be decided, are we ready to then go into manufacturing, or are there some significant changes that need to be made? Once we have a process that is locked down and we can commercially manufacture that, then we can look at a cost per kilo. So in a way, the risk passes from the client then to Olon. So then we would receive a purchase order for, by the end of Q2, we want to receive X number of tons, and then we go forward. So I think then whilst we're doing this scaling up and with the optimization, is quite often due to changes in market needs, a client will say, well, if possible, we would like to achieve sooner rather than later this cost target. And it really is a collaborative approach to look at the process to say, where do we see opportunities to streamline and improve that? But I will also just raise the flag of this needs to be looked at earlier rather than later, because I have had an example where after completing a successful demonstration batch, the client said, okay, for the consistency, this is the new target that we're looking to achieve. And then I had the delicate position of going back to them and just said, actually, if you look at the cost of your raw materials, the cost of your raw materials is higher than your target cost per batch. So yes, so understanding realistically where you need to go is important at the start, because we do our best, but we can't produce miracles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another really key important point that you made, Deborah, is managing risk throughout the tech transfer and production process, and how that risk is held by different parties within the project. So when is the risk mainly held in the hands of the customer versus when you're able to take on that risk? And it sounds like that's something that is constantly being managed in the relationship as you work with customers to get them to a point where they're commercially producing consistently, which is a huge win for any partnership when trying to make a bioproduct get into the world's hands. So thank you for being honest there, and also for sharing that example. I'm sure that there's lots of people that can relate or use it to consider if they're at the point where they're getting to that scale, and they're getting to a point where they're thinking about trying to reduce their COGS. So I know we're getting close to the time for questions and answers. So I have one final thought to talk about here that we have written down, and we'd love to hear from the audience. So if you haven't put your question in the questions and answers yet, please do. Or if you see one that's very similar to what you've been thinking about, please upvote it. But Deborah, looking ahead, thinking about the future in our industry, where would you say that you see the biggest opportunities for using microbial fermentation to make things? We're thinking about things like personal care and CPG and food industries. Do you have thoughts on those industries, or would you say that there's actually other industries that you see, being a big player in the fermentation space in the future?
Yes. Yes to everything there. So I think there are lots of opportunities. There's lots of opportunities coming up in ag bio, which are really interesting. I think the food will also, with colors and things, and the changes in regulations. So some things are driven by regulation or market. So those will have an impact. I think that commodity, high volume, real commodity products at low cost are still going to struggle for a little while yet, because driving down the cost of goods and getting to the scale of where it starts being profitable and cost effective. I mean, quite often we'll just say, even if you used all 4,500,000 litres, which is a drop in the ocean to some of the requirements for these projects, we wouldn't be able to get you to the cost target that you need. So sometimes in those examples, we will say we can get you up to this scale, but after that, then you need to have a plan B. But I still see this area as still needing attention to actually scale up at profitability. But I think within flavors and fragrances, colors, both industrial and for food, I think enzymes are always super exciting, and they cover the whole range from pharma to food and other industrial applications. So they can be the actual final entity in the product, or they can be used as a processing aid during the manufacture. So I think they will always have a very strong place. And then you've just got other small molecules, peptides, other proteins within a whole range of sectors. I think there are lots of opportunities in a lot of these sectors, and as I say, driven by either consumer demand or regulatory changes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Deborah. So I've pulled up the questions that we have here from the audience. Thank you so much, everyone, for putting yours in. And please feel free to add as we go through this section. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we will try. So one that I'd love to start off with, Deborah, is from Rakesh. Rakesh asks, in DSP, what are the standard DSP equipments that are provided? And what are the support on new technology or equipment replacement suggestions?
So in terms of equipment, and then given that we have over 12 DSP suites, we don't give equipment lists because it lulls people into a false sense of security, because it tends to be not equipment do we have, it's rather, is it in the right place? So we've got centrifuges and we've got filtration, we've got TFF, UF, MF, NF. We've got spray drying, got spray dryers, gate dryers, but we've got an ATEX line in DSP, but not all of these are necessarily all connected in the same line. So, all I can say is we have lots of equipment. If there is a particular process, we look at what the equipment that is currently being used. And sometimes it's a case that either in-house or at a CMO, you will start with what is the equipment that is available. So, I mean, as we scale up, we prefer not to use centrifuges. We have centrifuges, prefer not to use them. Why? Because there are a lot of very fast-moving parts in it, and fast-moving parts, they tend to break down more than a filtration system. So then you have the question, how many centrifuges would you need in order to be able to continue with a process? Much rather go for filtration. But as I say, we have centrifuge because not everything can be moved to a filtration system. So that would be our approach to just equipment. If somebody has a process, share it with us. We will look at that and we will just say, okay, what we would like to do in pilot is split the broth. We will do your standard process, and then we will do what we think would be a smarter fit for us scaling up and see if we get to the same results. In terms of equipment is not available, or if we're replacing equipment, we will then just look to see what is the best equipment that we can get hold of that can deliver and install within Italy.
Right. Thank you, Deborah. On the topic of, ensuring consistency and trying to reduce issues that are happening as you scale up, going back to our discussion on waste streams, Sanjeev asks, interesting point about waste streams as feedstocks. What is the best way to ensure consistency, as these feedstocks can introduce a lot of variability? So you definitely mentioned that as an important point. Are there any examples where you've seen, being able to kind of tame a waste feedstock and use it and allow it to be more consistent, regardless of the seasonality and things like that?
I would just say, to be quite frank, honestly, at the moment, we have not been able to use an alternative feedstock. I am so longing to have the first example. And I think that absolutely is the key question from Sanjeev is, yes, so if you've got a waste material, yes, it has the the element that you're using it for, whether that's, you know, a protein source or a carbon source, etc. But it's also going to have perhaps some negative things which give a negative impact on growth or processing. And that then needs to be looked at, and each feedstock would need to be looked at what is the process and what's the molecule. Because the last thing you want is that there is a protein within the waste feedstock that co-precipitates with the protein that you want within your product, and now you have got to try and sort of unvelcro this during your DSP, which is going to add cost and time. So I think they need to be developed in balance, and this is why I say there needs to be a specification, so that if there is a variation, that it's known, it's controlled, and so you can manage the process to adapt to that. And I think that's missing at the moment, at least at our scale.
That makes sense. Steve here asks, is there a rule of thumb to describe your pricing model for companies that want to produce 50 to 1,000 tons per year? And one thing that pops out to me right now is reading that there's a big difference, I think, between 50 tons and 1,000 tons. Would love to hear your thoughts there, Deborah.
So we've manufactured projects at 1,000 tons plus delivery. So I think running a campaign of 5 to 10 batches and then running a campaign of 100 batches is different only in how you actually run the process. And I mentioned earlier about staggering fermenters. So if we have 1 week fermentation and a half-week DSP, we can stagger the fermenters to keep that DSP fully occupied. That gives clear benefits. So sometimes there's not the 2-to-1 simple ratio, but as soon as you start locking hours of fermentation or DSP, it allows you basically within the same time slot to get more product out. So it's either more per batch or more batches because you've shortened the time to produce a batch. So, and this is where meeting and understanding what the cost target is, because a lot of the times in order to get to this target, this low target cost, high volume, then there needs to be a different way of doing things, which may include CapEx. So then it's decided, is it worth it? I can't decide that. That has to be with the client. If it's the only way you're going to get to profitability, then obviously yes. If the payback, it gives some benefits, but yeah, not really so real benefits, then you can just delay that decision until it becomes critical. So does that help?
I think so. I feel like I have a better understanding from that. But
I would just say that, as an additional, so basically, as far as Olon is concerned, how we cost is plant occupancy, and that's why making things faster or more per batch has such an impact on the ultimate cost per kilo.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, Deborah. So thank you very much for interacting with us today, everyone, and for putting your questions in. Please, if you have any other questions or thoughts or would like to get in contact with Deborah or I, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Deborah, are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave everyone with today?
Just realistic approaches always are the best way. Simple is best. If in doubt, give me a call.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah, again for joining and for being so honest and candid. It was amazing to speak with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining and taking the time out of your days or evenings to listen in. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kat. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.